Every prayer you've ever spoken out loud was designed to keep you deaf to the one frequency the Archons cannot intercept. 2 billion people pray with words every single day. They were taught to do exactly that. Speak the prayer, repeat the formula, fill the silence, and the Nag Hammadi texts, discovered buried in the Egyptian desert in 1945, tell us why. Because when you speak, the Archons hear you. When you go silent in a specific way, they cannot find you. Jesus knew this. He practiced it. And the church that built itself in his name removed every trace of the instructions he left behind. In this video, you're going to discover 3 things. First, the neuroscience behind what happens to your brainwaves the moment you stop talking and enter true silence. The numbers are not what you expect. Second, what the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas calls the bridal chamber of silence, and why early church councils spent 2 centuries trying to bury it. Third, a specific practice you can do tonight. Not a meditation, not a ritual, something far simpler and far older. But before we get there, there's a question I need you to sit with. If Jesus retreated to the desert for 40 days, not to pray out loud, not to speak to God in words, but specifically to be silent, what was he actually doing out there? The answer to that question is what this entire video is about. In 2013, researchers at the University of Rochester published a study that no one in the mainstream wellness industry talks about. They were studying the effect of silence, complete, imposed silence, on the brains of mice. 2 hours of silence per day produced new cells in the hippocampus, the region responsible for memory, for learning, for integrating experience into understanding. That's not metaphor. That's tissue, not music, not binaural beats, not guided meditation with a calm voice talking you through your breath. Complete silence, with no instruction, no goal, no output. The brain responded as if it had been given a nutrient it had been starved of. Think of your brain like a body of water. When there's constant noise, traffic, voices, notifications, prayers spoken out loud, the surface is choppy. Nothing gets through from below. Silence flattens the surface, and things start rising. There's a second number worth knowing: 0.1 hertz. That's the frequency at which your heart and your brain enter what cardiac researchers at the HeartMath Institute call coherence, a state where the heart rhythm, the breath, and the brain waves synchronize. It happens naturally in deep, wordless stillness. In this state, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that filters experience, that decides what's real and what isn't, quiets down. Not shuts off, quiets. Researchers who study this state consistently report the same thing from their subjects. People in coherence say they feel like they've stepped outside something, like a layer of noise that they didn't know was always running. Stopped. Now here's what the researchers don't say in their papers, because it's not their job to say it. This state, this coherence state, this exact neurological profile, it was described with precise detail 2,000 years before the equipment to measure it existed. Not in a self-help book. In a suppressed Gnostic gospel. In 1945, a farmer digging near the cliffs of Jabal al-Tarif in Upper Egypt broke open a sealed clay jar and found 13 leather-bound books inside. What he found were the Gnostic Gospels, texts written in Coptic, buried around 400 CE, documenting a version of early Christianity that the Council of Nicaea had spent decades trying to eliminate. One of those texts, the Gospel of Philip, contains a concept that has no direct English translation. In Coptic, it appears as H, the place of abundance. But Gnostic scholars who've spent careers with this text, like Elaine Pogels at Princeton, describe it not as a location, but as a state. Specifically, the state you enter when every layer of constructed noise is removed. When the demiurge, the false creator the Gnostics called the Archon, can no longer locate your frequency. The Gnostics made a distinction that almost no modern church makes. They separated logos, spoken word, from Sigē, text overlay, Sigē, Sigē, Greek, the sacred feminine silence. Sigē in Greek is not merely the absence of sound. In Valentinian Gnostic cosmology, Sigē is the first emanation from the monad, the original silence from which the divine first moved. It's the mother of the aeons. It precedes creation. When Jesus withdrew to silent places, the desert, the garden, the mountain alone before dawn, the Gnostic texts are explicit that he was not going there to speak. He was going there to enter Sigē, not to ask, to become unreachable. The heart math researchers call it coherence. The Valentinian Gnostics called it entering Sigē. Both describe the same thing, a state in which the ordinary machinery of the mind, the filter, the narrator, the constant internal commentary, goes quiet, and something underneath it becomes accessible. The scientists measure the brainwaves. The Gnostics described what moves through when the brainwaves change. They weren't writing about two different things. They were drawing the same map with different instruments. The Essenes knew this too. The community at Qumran, the group most scholars believe preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls, had a practice called Hayye HaNefesh. It was a daily practice of wordless silence performed before sunrise. No chanting, no recitation, no intermediary. Scholars of Second Temple Judaism note that this practice was explicitly designed to create an interior state in which the practitioner was considered, in the language of the time, hidden from the watchers. The watchers, which is what the earliest Semitic sources called the Archons. Two traditions, two separate discovery sites, two distinct languages, one instruction: go silent before they can hear you. So why, if this was the core practice of early mystic Christianity, confirmed by the texts we dug out of the ground with our own hands, why were you never taught this? Why were you taught to speak your prayers out loud? 325 CE, the Council of Nicaea. Constantine, Emperor of Rome, calls together 318 bishops to settle what Christianity will officially be. Not spiritually, politically. He needs a unified religion to hold an empire together. A religion with a centralized priesthood, clear rituals, spoken liturgy, congregational prayer in public. Text overlay: Council of Nicaea, 325 CE. The texts that described interior silence as a direct path to the divine, texts where no priest, no church, no spoken intermediary was needed, were classified heretical, dangerous, because a person who can access the divine in silence doesn't need an institution. And an institution that can't be needed cannot consolidate power. This wasn't theology, it was architecture. If silence is the path, priests are unnecessary. If direct access is possible, liturgy is just noise. If the Gnostic texts are right, that the Archons operate through the mechanism of the external, the vocal, the performed, then turning Christianity into a religion of loud, public spoken ritual was either the greatest theological mistake in history, or it was completely intentional. Pause. No music for 1.5 seconds. The historical record doesn't resolve that question, but it does record what was burned. Text overlay, 2 columns side by side. Left. Sigē, wordless interiority, no intermediary, no witness. Right. What replaced it? Public liturgy, spoken prayer, congregational performance? What was Arch, the interior place of abundance, became Sunday service. What was Sigē, the silent emanation that preceded even creation, became, please speak your intentions out loud so the community can affirm them. The form survived. The function was replaced. So, back to the question from the beginning. What was Jesus doing in the desert for 40 days? The Gospel of Mark says he was tempted by Satan. But the Gnostic Gospel of the Egyptians, a text the Council of Nicaea never got to destroy because it wasn't on the list yet, uses a different word for what happened in the desert. It says Jesus entered Sigē, the primordial silence, and that in that state, the Archons found no place to stand in him. Text overlay. Gospel of the Egyptians, Nag Hammadi Codex 3. The 40 days weren't a test of willpower. They were a practice of inaccessibility. He wasn't proving he could resist. He was making himself impossible to locate. Here's what they couldn't destroy. They burned the texts. They outlawed the practices. They built institutions loud enough to drown out the silence. And the silence was still there when the burning stopped. It was there in every Coptic monastery that kept copying manuscripts by hand. It was there in the jar buried at the base of the cliffs in Egypt. It was there in 1945, when a farmer's mattock broke the clay seal. And it's here now, because you cannot uncreate a frequency. You can only teach people to ignore it. 13 codices, 52 texts, buried for 1,600 years. And in the Gospel of Thomas, Logion 50 specifically, Jesus gives a description that reads differently once you understand Sigē. Text overlay. Logion 50, Gospel of Thomas, Nag Hammadi Codex 2. He says, if they ask you, where do you come from? Tell them, we came from the light. Then he says, if they ask you, what is the sign of your Father in you? Tell them, it is movement and rest. Movement and rest. Not faith and works, not words and deeds, movement and rest. The Gnostic interpreters of this text are consistent. Rest here is not inactivity. It's Sigē. It's the interior stillness where the Archons find no signature, no frequency to track, no external noise to grab onto. Here's what you can do tonight. And I mean that literally. Tonight. Before you sleep, find 2 minutes of actual silence. No phone, no background noise, no guided audio, no intention setting, no visualizations. Sit. And instead of filling the silence with words, even silent words, even thoughts you're directing at something, do this. Notice that you are not making a sound. That's it. Not a meditation, not a prayer, not a technique, just the bare fact of your own silence, noticed clearly. Text overlay. 2 minutes, pre-sleep. No goal, no words, just noticed silence. What the Gnostic texts describe, and what the neurological research independently confirms, is that this single act, choosing silence and noticing it without directing it toward any goal, begins to create the interior condition they called H, the place of abundance. Not because you performed it correctly, because the Archons, whatever you understand that word to mean, operate through the machinery of noise, performance, and directed intention. Silence without direction is the one thing that machinery cannot process. The farmers who buried those codices in Egypt knew the institution was coming to burn everything. They buried the texts instead of burning them themselves. That choice, that one quiet decision, is why you can read the Gospel of Thomas today. Silence as a weapon doesn't mean silence as defeat. It means silence as preservation. Silence as the thing that survives after everything loud has been used up. Jesus withdrew to silent places before every major event in the Gospels, before the Transfiguration, before the crucifixion. before his answers to Pilate, where he said nothing at all. The silence wasn't absence, it was preparation. If this changed the way you read the Gnostic texts, or the way you read what the Gospels say Jesus actually practiced, the next video goes deeper into the Archons themselves. Specifically, what the Nag Hammadi texts say they feed on, and which of your daily habits are exactly what they designed. The instructions have always been there. Most people just weren't told where to look.